There is a unique moment at the threshold between two worlds, an instant suspended in eternity, where consciousness begins to float beyond the bounds of the physical body. A moment when the veils that separate our limited perception from a broader reality start to dissolve like mist at dawn. In this sacred space, this interlude between being and not being, something extraordinary happens. Our consciousness meets its own reflection. What do we see as we approach this boundary? What do we experience when our awareness for a few precious seconds glimpses what lies beyond physical existence? Decades of research on near-death experiences reveal a fascinating pattern. The symbols and visions that arise at this threshold are not random neurological glitches or fanciful delusions. They are mirrors, mirrors of the soul, deep reflections of who we truly are. Think about it for a moment. If we could strip consciousness of all social masks, all constructs of ego, all limitations imposed by the physical identity, what would remain? Who would we be in that state of perceptual purity? Near-death experiences offer a profound clue. We are, at our core, what we perceive when we're closest to the dissolution of the everyday self. The light. That's almost always the first element to appear. A primordial symbol that shows up with astonishing consistency in NDEs across the world. A light that transcends earthly description. It's not merely a visual phenomenon, but a living, pulsing, conscious presence. A light that sees, that knows, that understands. A light that, in some inexplicable way, is felt as the very essence of unconditional love. But pay close attention to the reports, and you'll notice revealing nuances. The way each person describes and interprets this light varies slightly. For some, it's an unmistakably divine presence. For others, an impersonal cosmic energy. Some sense it with feminine qualities, others with masculine ones, and still others describe it as a force beyond any human categorization. These variations are not accidental. They reflect the deeper structure of the individual soul, its most essential beliefs, not just the ones we think we hold, but those woven into the very fabric of our being. The expanded awareness experienced at this threshold is perhaps the most transformative aspect of it all. People report extraordinary mental clarity, an instant and holistic understanding. It's as if, by partially detaching from the physical brain, consciousness doesn't become less but infinitely more lucid, more expansive, more capable of grasping complex patterns and multidimensional truths. This expansion reveals something profound. Maybe the physical brain doesn't produce consciousness at all, but rather filters and narrows a much vaster awareness, making it manageable for biological life. Now consider how this changes our understanding of what it means to be human. If at the edge of death we experience expansion rather than diminishment, it suggests we are fundamentally much more than our bodies, much more than our personal identities, much more than our life stories. Those who return from these experiences often describe a feeling of coming home when they encounter that light, that field of expanded consciousness, as if they recognize a more natural, more truthful state of being, a state they somehow always knew, but had completely forgotten during the immersion in physical life. This intuitive recognition leads us to a profound question. If this state of expanded consciousness feels so familiar, so natural, so much like home to those who briefly touch it, what does that say about our essential nature? It suggests we may be temporary visitors in this physical reality, vast consciousnesses who voluntarily narrowed their perception to inhabit limited bodies for a finite time. The way we respond to this field of expanded consciousness seems deeply connected to our spiritual development throughout life. Those who have nurtured an openness to transcendence, who've come to understand themselves as more than just physical bodies, often describe a smoother transition, a more natural acceptance of this expansive state. not because they believed in it intellectually, but because they had cultivated even unconsciously the inner faculties necessary to navigate it. As we near this threshold, all artificial constructs of the ego begin to dissolve. The social masks, the roles we play, the identities we've spent decades crafting, everything starts to fade like sandcastles before the rising tide. What remains? That which is essential, the irreducible core of who we truly are. This is why what we see before we die says so much about who we are. It's not about random hallucinations from a brain under stress. It's a revelation, a revealing of the deepest structures of our consciousness, of what we truly value, fear, love, and understand at our very core. The light is not just something we see. It is something that sees us, that knows us completely without judgment, with a total understanding that goes beyond human comprehension. And in that mutual recognition, in that moment of clear and unfiltered perception, we may find the first true glimpse of who we really are, beyond all disguises and self-deceptions of daily life. And then, after the encounter with the light, another consistent element appears in near-death experiences: the tunnel. A passage, a corridor, a vortex that seems to connect different dimensions of reality. This archetypal symbol shows up with surprising regularity across cultures, geographies, and historical eras. Why this specific pattern? Why this image of transition of passage? We might understand the tunnel as a visceral metaphor for the transition between states of consciousness. But maybe it's more than a metaphor. Perhaps it's how our consciousness, trained in a reality bound by space and time, translates the experience of moving between dimensions of existence. Unable to directly grasp a process that transcends our normal cognitive framework, the mind creates a spatial representation, a passage, a path, a tunnel. The journey through this tunnel is not just physical or energetic. It is an archetypal journey. It echoes ancient myths of descent into the underworld, of crossing realms, of death and rebirth. Carl Jung would say these images emerge from a deeper layer of the psyche, the collective unconscious, where the universal patterns of human experience reside. And yet, even with the universality of this symbol, each person experiences the tunnel slightly differently. For some, it's a corridor of light. For others, a vortex of vibrant colors. Some travel through it quickly, others float slowly. Some feel initial fear that transforms into peace. Others feel only serenity. These variations aren't random. They're the soul's fingerprints, revealing profound aspects of how each individual relates to transcendence, the unknown, radical change. The mental landscapes that emerge during this journey are just as revealing. Some people report scenes of indescribable beauty, lush fields, majestic mountains, oceans of light. Others describe more abstract realms, geometric dimensions, patterns of energy, structures impossible to express in earthly language. What determines these differences? It appears to be the unique architecture of individual consciousness, its deepest aesthetic preferences, its personal symbolic language. When we examine the cultural differences in near-death experiences, we find a fascinating pattern. The universal elements, light, tunnel, life review, appear consistently, but are interpreted through specific cultural lenses. A Hindu individual might encounter deities from the Hindu pantheon, while a Christian might see Jesus or angels. An atheist may interpret the experience in more naturalistic terms, perhaps as a field of energy or an impersonal cosmic dimension. These cultural differences suggest that although the core experience seems to transcend culture, the way we interpret it is inevitably filtered through our cognitive structures, beliefs, and expectations. But this doesn't diminish its depth or meaning. On the contrary, it shows how human consciousness, even at the edge of death, continues to be a meaning maker, a seeker of understanding in the face of the ineffable. Encounters with beings of light or guides form another recurring and deeply revealing element. Some people meet deceased relatives, others see religious figures meaningful to their tradition, and still others encounter presences they describe simply as beings of light, without any specific human form. Why do these meetings occur, and what do they reveal about who we are? A strictly materialistic view would suggest these are projections from a dying brain, reconstructions of memories or expectations. A spiritual view might say they are actual encounters with independent consciousnesses inhabiting other dimensions of reality. Whatever interpretation one leans toward, the pattern of who we meet reveals much about our deepest emotional bonds, spiritual anchors, and inner guides. There is one especially powerful quality in these encounters, the overwhelming feeling of being completely known and completely loved. People describe a mutual recognition with these beings, a communication that goes beyond words, a total and instant understanding. It's as if, in that moment, all the barriers that normally keep us from feeling truly seen and understood dissolve completely. This feeling of being deeply known points to one of the soul's most profound needs, the need for authentic recognition. Not the shallow validation of our talents or achievements, but a recognition that penetrates every layer of our being, one that understands our struggles, our fears, our most secret longings, a recognition that does not judge, but embraces the totality of who we are. Perhaps this is why these encounters often provoke such intense emotion, a joy that defies description mixed with deep relief, as if we could finally lay down the burden of pretending to be something we're not, of hiding parts of ourselves, of trying to meet external expectations, as if we could finally just be in our purest essence and be loved exactly as we are. The journey through the tunnel and the encounters along the way reveal another essential aspect of near-death experiences. The sense of participating in an organized, meaningful, intentional process. Rarely do people describe chaos or randomness. Instead, they speak of a profound sense of order, as if every part of the experience is part of an intelligent design, a natural process with inherent purpose and meaning. What does this say about the nature of consciousness? It suggests that even when normal neurological systems are failing, the human mind retains its fundamental capacity to perceive or generate meaning, order, and purpose. It suggests that the need for meaning is not just a cultural construct or surface-level cognitive function, but is woven into the very fabric of human consciousness itself. And so, as we approach the next universal element of near-death experiences, the life review, we begin to understand that these symbols and encounters are not just passive experiences, but active participation in a process of self-revelation. Every part of the journey seems designed not only to transport consciousness into another realm of reality, but to unveil aspects of the soul that remained hidden during physical life. The tunnel is not just a passage between worlds, it's a passage between states of being. The beings of light are not merely external guides, they are mirrors reflecting our deepest connections. The light is not simply something we observe, it is a field of awareness that watches us, knows us, and reveals us to ourselves. And then, at the very core of the near-death experience, comes perhaps its most deeply revealing and transformative element, the life review. Not a simple replay of memories, not a chronological recap of events, but a multidimensional encounter with the totality of one's existence. Those who've undergone this phenomenon often describe it as something entirely different from remembering. I wasn't watching my life, they say. I was living it again, from multiple perspectives at once. That's the first extraordinary aspect of the life review, simultaneity. Linear time dissolves, past, present, and even possible futures, coexist in a unified field of experience. Even more remarkable is that during this review, we don't just relive our own actions and thoughts. We feel their effects on others. We experience the pain we caused, the joy we gave, the comfort we offered, the hurt we inflicted, not as abstract ideas, but as direct sensations. For a few sacred moments, it's as if we transcend the boundaries of our individual awareness and live through the hearts and minds of everyone we ever touched. This aspect of the life review reveals a profound truth about our nature. We are intrinsically interconnected beings. Our identities are not as separate and isolated as we believe. Every gesture, every word, every action, even every thought, creates ripples that extend far beyond the limits we imagine for our influence. What's especially striking in these reviews is which moments seem to carry the most weight, the most significance, the most brightness or intensity. They're not always what we'd expect, not the career milestones, material achievements, or public recognitions. Instead, they're often small acts of kindness, moments of genuine connection, flashes of presence, and unconditional love. 1. Woman described how, in her life review, the most luminous and meaningful moment was when, as a child, she stopped to comfort a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, something she had completely forgotten in her conscious life. A man said, the most impactful moment in his review was simply holding his grandmother's hand while she died, being truly present in her fear and suffering. These aren't heroic deeds by conventional standards, but they seem to be the moments when we're most aligned with our deepest essence. On the other hand, the moments that bring the most discomfort during the review are not always major moral failings, but often instances where we failed to show compassion when we could have, moments where we chose judgment over understanding, fear over love, separation over connection. One man described a deep sadness as he relived a time he ignored a distressed co-worker because he was too busy to engage. A woman said her greatest regret was realizing how often she was physically present with her children, but mentally elsewhere. What these patterns reveal is nothing less than a hierarchy of the soul's values. They suggest that at the most fundamental level of our being, we value connection over achievement, compassion over power, authenticity over status, presence over efficiency. Not because society told us to, but because these qualities appear aligned with the deepest truth of human consciousness. Another extraordinary aspect of the life review is that even when it includes moments of deep regret or sadness, it is rarely experienced as punitive or condemning. There is no external judgment, no sentence being passed, no punishment being dealt. Instead, there is a profound and compassionate understanding of the full context of every choice, the conditioning, the lack of awareness, the inner and outer pressures that shaped each decision. This non-judgmental quality of the life review teaches us something powerful about the nature of the cosmic consciousness we reconnect with at the edge of death. It suggests that the universe operates less on principles of guilt and punishment, and more on understanding and evolutionary learning. The purpose of the review doesn't seem to be to shame us, but to help us grasp more deeply the laws of cause and effect, especially in the realm of human relationships and emotional impact. People often report that the implicit question throughout the entire review isn't, "What did you accomplish?" or "How successful were you?" but simply, "How did you love? How did you show love, not just to those close to you, but to everyone, including yourself? How freely did you allow love to move through you, or how much did you block it? How often did you choose love over fear, connection over separation, compassion over judgment?" This emphasis on love as the fundamental metric of evaluation transcends any single religion. It's not just a Christian idea, or Hindu, or Buddhist, or Muslim. Though all these traditions echo this truth in different ways, it seems to be a deeper law, embedded in the very structure of consciousness and reality itself. The Life Review also reveals something profoundly important about time and causality. Many people describe seeing patterns and connections between seemingly unrelated events in their lives. They see how a choice made in childhood created a pattern repeated in adult relationships. They notice how one small act of kindness triggered a chain of events with positive effects decades later. They contemplate how a single moment of courage opened doors they didn't even know existed. This ability to perceive larger patterns suggests that our lives are not random or fragmented, but coherent narratives filled with recurring themes, evolutionary lessons, and emerging purpose. Not necessarily a fixed or pre-written destiny, but a purpose that unfolds through our choices, our intentions, and our capacity to grow. Perhaps the most transformative part of the Life Review is its power to bring reconciliation and integration. Many people report that by experiencing their life from multiple perspectives, including the perspectives of those they hurt or were hurt by, they reach a state of understanding and forgiveness that once felt impossible in physical life. The lines between right and wrong, victim and perpetrator, self and other, begin to dissolve in the light of a more expansive understanding. This reconciliation doesn't minimize the pain caused by harmful actions. On the contrary, by directly feeling the impact of our behavior on others, we develop a deeper empathy and a visceral understanding of why compassion and care matter so much. But we also develop compassion for ourselves, recognizing how our own wounds, fears, and conditioning shape the choices we made in less skillful moments. It's as if the Life Review offers us a chance to gather all the fragmented parts of our story, our joys and sorrows, our triumphs and failures, our love and our losses, and weave them into a coherent, meaningful narrative. Rather than judging certain aspects of our past as good and others as bad, we begin to see how each experience, every decision, every relationship played a role in our growth as conscious beings. And so, as the Life Review draws to a close, we emerge with a deeper understanding, not just of who we've been, but of who we are. Multidimensional beings, whose essence transcends the limitations of physical identity and personality. We come to realize that we are, at our core, beings of light and love, temporarily experiencing the density and separation of physical life for the purpose of soul growth and evolution. After the profound journey of the Life Review, many people who undergo near-death experiences report an even more transformative phenomenon, the dissolution of ego boundaries. It's as if the walls that define the separate self, so solid and unquestionable during physical life, begin to turn translucent, permeable, and eventually vanish completely. This dissolution is not experienced as a loss, as we might fear from within the embodied perspective, but as an indescribable expansion. I wasn't less, people often say. I was infinitely more. It's a paradoxical sensation of completely losing oneself and, at the same time, finding oneself more fully than ever before. What emerges in that state is a sense of universal oneness, not as a philosophical concept, but as a direct and undeniable experience. People describe feeling united not just with other humans, but with animals, plants, the entire planet, even distant galaxies and stars. The separations that once seemed so fundamental between self and other, inside and outside, part and whole, are revealed to be temporary constructs, useful for physical life, but not reflective of ultimate reality. I was everything, and everything was me, said one woman after her NDE. There was no longer any difference between what I called me and what I thought was not me. It was all one expression of the same consciousness, the same energy, the same love. This Experience of cosmic unity leaves a lasting imprint on those who return to physical life. They don't come back to the same identity they once had. The ego reforms, the boundaries necessary for physical living are re-established, but never quite in the same way. There's a lingering openness, a constant awareness that the self is both real and illusory, necessary for human experience, but not the ultimate truth of who we are. This transformation of identity may help explain one of the most consistently reported changes after a near-death experience: the dramatic decrease in the fear of death. How could the end of the physical body still be seen as the end of the self, after directly experiencing that the self extends far beyond the limits of physical identity? How could death remain the great unknown after having glimpsed, even briefly, the nature of consciousness that transcends the body? The paradox of individuality and interconnection revealed in these experiences may be one of the most profound insights NDEs offer. We are not invited to deny our individuality or discard the beauty and value of our unique expression of consciousness. Rather, we're invited to recognize that our individuality exists within and as part of a vast, indescribable tapestry of interconnected awareness. It's as if each one of us is simultaneously a single wave, with our own shape, motion, and personality, and the entire ocean. The wave is never separate from the ocean. It's made of the same water, moves with the same current, and always returns to the same source. But during its brief time as a distinct form, it offers a unique perspective, a specific expression of the whole that could exist in no other way. The detachment from the physical body during an NDE also reveals deeper layers of identity that usually remain hidden in daily life. Without the constant anchor of physical sensation, without the endless stream of sensory input that normally consumes so much of our attention, more subtle aspects of consciousness can rise to the surface. Many people report a sudden access to knowledge and understanding that far surpasses anything they could have learned through experience or education. Some describe it as tapping into a universal mind or cosmic library where all knowledge is available. Others experience it as a complete and instantaneous understanding of questions that had troubled them their whole lives. "I just knew how everything was connected," one man said. Not just intellectually, but everything. The relationships between all living things, the purpose of existence, the nature of time and space. It wasn't like learning something new. It was like remembering something I had always known, but completely forgotten. This sense of remembering rather than learning is reported with surprising frequency and raises fascinating questions about the nature of human consciousness. Could it be that we already know at some deep level far more than our waking minds can access? Could the physical brain be less a generator of consciousness and more a filter, narrowing a vast field of awareness into something usable for earthly life? The relationship between near-death experiences and the idea of existential authenticity deserves special attention. Existentialist philosophers have long argued that an authentic life requires an honest confrontation with our own mortality. By facing the reality of death, we are freed from trivial concerns and empowered to make choices based on deeper, more personal values. NDEs offer a different kind of confrontation with mortality, not as absolute ending, but as transition and transformation. And yet, the effect on authenticity seems just as powerful, perhaps even more so. People who return from near-death experiences often report a renewed clarity about what truly matters, a willingness to live according to their deepest values, even when that defies social expectations, an ability to distinguish between the essential and the superficial in their lives. "I came back with an internal lie detector," one woman said. I can feel immediately when I'm being inauthentic, when I'm living according to outside expectations instead of my inner truth, and I just can't do it anymore. It feels physically uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that don't fit. This shift in the relationship with authenticity reflects a fundamental transformation in the hierarchy of values. During a near-death experience, people often report a visceral understanding that, in the end, we will not be measured by our status, our wealth, our power, or even our accomplishments, but by the quality of presence we brought to each moment, by the depth of love we allowed to flow through us, by the authenticity with which we lived our unique journey. The temporary dissolution of the ego during an NDE also offers a glimpse into what many spiritual and contemplative traditions have long suggested, that the ego, the I we so deeply identify with, is in truth a construct, not fictitious or meaningless, but a tool, a necessary vehicle for navigating physical reality, but not our fundamental identity. To see through this construct, even for a moment, has profound implications. Many people report a significant reduction in fear, not just of physical death, but of all forms of loss and change. If the self is not a fixed, permanent thing that must be protected at all costs, but a fluid process in constant evolution, then change and transformation can be embraced as natural, even desirable, instead of feared. This transformed perspective also tends to diminish self-absorption and the obsessive need to defend a personal image. When we understand that our identity is not something rigid that needs to be constantly protected, but a temporary vessel for expressing a much greater awareness, it becomes less important to be right all the time, less essential to be validated, less urgent to control how we are perceived. Instead, what emerges is a genuine curiosity about life, an openness to experience, a willingness to grow and evolve, and a much greater capacity for real laughter, especially at oneself. Humor, after all, often comes from the ability to see things from multiple perspectives simultaneously, something that becomes far more natural when the tight grip on the small self has been loosened, even temporarily. This temporary ego dissolution also seems to reconnect us with transpersonal aspects of consciousness, qualities like compassion, wisdom, gratitude, and reverence, which go beyond the limited lens of the individual personality. These qualities begin to be recognized not as virtues we must work hard to cultivate, but as inherent attributes of the greater consciousness we truly are. Returning to life after a near-death experience is often described as a symbolic rebirth, a second chance, not just to live, but to live differently, more aligned with deeper truths glimpsed on the threshold between worlds. The person comes back, but they don't return as the same individual. Something fundamental has changed. A transformation has taken place, irreversible and profound. It's like I lived my entire life in a dark room, seeing only shadows on the wall, one man said. And then, for a few precious moments, someone took me outside to see the sun, the mountains, the ocean, the source of the shadows. Now I'm back in the room, but I can never confuse the shadows with reality again. This Platonic analogy captures something essential about the return. The person brings back a perspective that transcends the narrow view of everyday physical life. This doesn't diminish the human experience. On the contrary, it often enhances it dramatically, infusing the ordinary with extraordinary meaning and purpose. The transformations in values and perception after an NDE are remarkable in their consistency and endurance. Long-term follow-up studies show that these changes are not temporary or superficial, but often persist and even deepen over the years. Among the most common shifts are a dramatic decrease in materialism and status-seeking. People who return from NDEs often lose interest in accumulating wealth, competing for success, or chasing external markers of value. This doesn't mean they Become poor or unmotivated, many remain successful by conventional standards, but their relationship with success and possessions changes completely. A significant increase in appreciation for small, everyday moments. The beauty of a sunset, the sound of rain on a window, a child's laughter, the taste of ripe fruit. Simple experiences like these often become profound sources of joy and gratitude. It's as if a veil has been lifted, allowing the extraordinary to shine through the ordinary. A deep reconnection with nature and all living beings. Many people report that after their NDE, they feel a heightened sensitivity to the interconnection of all life, a sense of responsibility for the health of the planet, and often an inability to cause harm to other beings. Some become vegetarians or vegans, others simply live with greater awareness and respect toward all forms of life, a much greater ability to stay present in the moment. Having touched a glimpse of eternity, or the vastness of now, many NDEs report significantly less preoccupation with the past or anxiety about the future. Instead, they feel deep appreciation for the present, the only moment in which life truly happens, a reorientation of priorities toward relationships and human connection. People often report that, after their NDE, relationships become the central focus of their lives, not relationships as possessions or sources of validation, but as sacred opportunities for mutual growth, love, and authentic expression, an almost total loss of the fear of death. After directly experiencing that consciousness continues beyond the physical body, most people no longer fear the end of life. This release from the fear of death often unleashes an extraordinary energy to fully live, to take risks that once seemed impossible, to speak truth that once felt too dangerous to share. What can we learn from these transformations, even without having had a near-death experience ourselves? Perhaps the most important realization is that we are so much more than we think we are, that the boundaries of the self, which seem so solid and unquestionable, are in truth far more fluid and permeable than our everyday experience suggests. That within each of us exists a capacity for transcendence, for cosmic connection, for unconditional love, and for meaning that goes far beyond conventional definitions of value and success. Another crucial lesson is that our daily priorities are often deeply misaligned with what truly matters from the deathbed perspective. We spend endless time, energy, and attention chasing things that in the end, or in a life review, may seem trivial. Meanwhile, we often neglect the connections, the expressions of love, the moments of full presence that actually create a meaningful life. The study of near-death experiences invites us to ask, what if we could realign our lives with what truly matters before reaching the edge of death? What if we could live now, today, in this moment, informed by the wisdom of those who have glimpsed beyond the veil? This is not an invitation to escape the world, to ignore the practical demands of life, or to seek transcendence at the expense of grounded engagement. On the contrary, it's a call for deeper integration between the spiritual and the practical, the transcendent and the immanent, the eternal and the temporal. Those who return from NDEs often speak of a palpable urgency to live their truth, to express their unique gifts, to bring more beauty, love, and healing into the world. Not because they feel obligated or pressured, but because they know at a visceral level that this is the purpose of their return, to bring something from there into the reality of here. What would you bring back if you had glimpsed beyond the veil? What truths would you no longer be able to deny? What promises would you no longer be able to break? What expression of your uniqueness could you no longer suppress? And maybe even more importantly, what would happen if we began to live as if we already knew what those who return have discovered? As if we already understood that we are, at our core, beings of love, temporarily experiencing separation. As if We already realize that every interaction, every choice, every moment of presence or distraction sends ripples far beyond what we can see. The symbols that consistently appear in near-death experiences, the light, the tunnel, the loving beings, the life review, all seem to point to a deeper structure of human consciousness, perhaps even of reality itself. A structure that includes inherent purpose, transcendent meaning, love as a fundamental force, and interconnection as an ontological truth. When Raymond Moody began collecting and studying near-death experiences over 4 decades ago, many dismissed his work as unscientific, subjective, even delusional. Today, while debates about interpretation continue, the consistency, the transformative effects, and the cross-cultural universality of these experiences have become undeniable to serious researchers. What we see before we die, or at the threshold of death, says a lot about who we are, not just as individuals, but as a species. It suggests we are beings of depth, of purpose, of transcendent connection, temporarily inhabiting the limits of physical reality for the sake of growth, self-discovery, and the evolution of consciousness. Every encounter with the light, every journey through the tunnel, every life review tells a story, not only about the person who experienced it, but about the nature of human consciousness itself. A story that invites us to consider that maybe, our materialist understanding of consciousness as a mere byproduct of brain activity is profoundly incomplete. That perhaps there is a dimension of awareness that transcends the physical, that continues after death, that is fundamentally connected to all other consciousness in the cosmos. This is not a dogmatic claim or an appeal to blind faith. It's an invitation to open contemplation, to sincere consideration of the evidence, not just the scientific data, though that matters, but also the qualitative evidence of direct human experience. An invitation to integrate objective knowledge with subjective wisdom in a more complete understanding of what it means to be human. And if there is truth in this perspective, if we are beings of light temporarily wearing physical bodies, experiencing the density and separation of earthly life for the purpose of growth, then how might we live differently? How might we treat each other, our planet, and ourselves, if we truly integrated that understanding into our daily lives? Perhaps the greatest lesson of near-death experiences is that we don't have to die to awaken to who we truly are, that the veils separating us from the perception of our true nature can be lifted through contemplative practices, through openness to the mystery, through conscious choices of love over fear, inclusion over separation, presence over avoidance. What you see before you die says much about who you are. But what you choose to see while you live, that perspective through which you interpret your life and your world, creates who you are becoming, and that choice, the choice of perspective, the choice of consciousness, is available to all of us in every moment, without needing to stand at death's door to claim it.